Good afternoon. My name's Mark McGregor, and I'm here to share with you this afternoon a little about success in an age of disruption. So before we get started, of course, I want to thank you all for joining us, but also call out a special thanks to Brian at ProQuest for inviting me to still go ahead and do this vendor neutral session for you today, and my boss Bruce Alcott at Abbey for allowing me to take time to work on this presentation, even though I'm not going to be pitching Abbey, although we might get a few plugs in along the way. Okay, so where should we start? Well, hang on a minute. We all know about COVID. You've been hearing about it, I'm sure, through lots of presentations, particularly talking around the future of work. But I think we should get back to the beginning. Well, okay, maybe not quite that far back. Can we bring it forward a little bit? Okay, yeah, we had a plague, people struggling, understand what's going on. Yeah, a little bit nearer to current time, please, because I know we had the Spanish flu pandemic as well, with 500 million infections, 20 to 50 million killed. Okay, I give in. I understand that actually, although we're talking a lot about COVID, we've had these things go on for a very long time. But let's have a little look at more related stuff, because there must be something that's a little different and a little unusual, particularly when we come to the economic impacts. Oh, okay, hang on a minute. Yeah, we've had the 2000s recession, the 1990s recession, the 80s, the 70s, the 50s, the 40s, and then all the way back to the 30s. Okay, I give in. I accept that although we're talking so much at the moment about COVID and the economic impacts, that actually it's nothing new. We have been there before. But most of the audience we've got here today is a little technology focused. So can we have a little look at something that's a little more to do with technology? Yeah, okay. So technological change, digital disruption, digital transformation, or shall we say technology transformation, has been going on for a long, long time. Right the way back to landlines, automobiles, and before that we could even go into electricity. The only thing that's really shifting, as we can see from this graph, is that actually the time between each of these disruptions is getting shorter and shorter, and the time from them coming about to becoming mass adoption is rising much, much faster than ever before. So the speed and the pace of some of that disruption may be something that's a little bit that we're not used to. But the one thing we can see is that based on this, we're going to get a lot more changes and a lot more things going on as we move forward. So the likelihood is of a steady state is pretty slim. I mean, if we drew it slightly differently, we could see that the treads are becoming shorter and the risers much higher. So when we talk about step change, it's step, 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 and keep going. But if we look at all of those quick graphics and just summarize it, what we can see is that while everything has changed, the way we interact, the fact that we're doing conferences, never mind online, but via video such as this is. So while everything's changed, and our social interactions, our family, the way that we work, actually nothing is really different. Because working differently, moving differently around, different social interactions, tragedy at a personal level for many people, the emotional pressures, those are all things that have gone on before. But what I find fascinating is over the last 8-10 years, I've talked to a lot of people about making use of something called Pestle, and there are various forms, and I'm sure that some of you have seen different ones with different pieces on there. But let me ask you, do you actually use something like this? Are you using it now? Are you still chasing that new normal? I'm sure a lot of people have talked about it through the conference, but I wonder, is there ever going to be something such as the new normal? Or is it that we're going to be changing faster and having to keep changing, and the only thing about new normal is we change faster? To which extent, when you're looking to respond either personally or within your organisations, the question to ask yourself is, are you building for change, or just building for some so-called steady state, getting ready to leap to the next crisis? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. It's time to do something differently. If you want to stop yourself and your organisations moving from crisis to crisis, whether it's 2000 to 2008, 2008 to COVID, and whatever comes next, then we need to think a completely different way about how we create and respond to change. Now, a lot of people that have used bits of Pestle are very focused on the technology and maybe a little bit more over the last few years on some of the environmental changes. Or maybe they've looked from a regulatory point of view at making sure they've got the legal. But interestingly enough, relatively few organisations have actually focused on looking at the social, economic and political implications. And as the last 3 years, whether in the US or in Europe, have shown, keeping an eye on that political landscape has a significant impact, because it also bleeds into the economic aspects of where we can do trade, how we can do trade, supply chains being disrupted through political manoeuvres as much as anything else. And then we look at where we are now and think, actually, there's a great social change going on. People think differently about work. People think differently about that work-life balance. Are you going to be an organisation that actually takes into account these things and tries to build and create an environment within which your customers want to do business with you, your employees want to work with you, and you serve society as a whole? Or are you just going to focus on saying the best way of responding is to cut costs, lay off people, automate whatever's left? And I can assure you that that's not a recipe for long-term success. So, as we look to that doing things differently, I thought that today what I really wanted to share with you is just a few thoughts that I've been having of just some of the aspects of change where I think perhaps you can think a little differently. I'm not going to be espousing anything that I think you have to do or you've got to do or anything like that. All I'd like to do is to get you thinking differently about some of these things and to ask yourselves whether you can make changes, whether you need to, or whether there's a different way of approaching it. So the key thoughts that I wanted to talk about were a little bit around reimagining performance measurement systems, reskilling for a hybrid digital workforce, focusing on real and unimagined journeys, a bit about data collection and management in, quite frankly, what is a remote world, a bit about management and motivation for remote workforces, and some ideas and thoughts around shifting from that management to leadership. So let's jump into the first one, reimagining performance measurement systems. So there's a graphic that I grabbed, and I'm sure many of you have seen something similar around the concept of performance management. We look at our balanced scorecards, we look at priorities, we're focused on efficiency, we've got goals, we put monitoring in place of one kind or another, and we're monitoring the scope and hopefully getting some improvements while we're managing time, whether that's time for activity, etc. But as I look at these frameworks, a lot of this performance management is all centered around how we're going to manage people or manage work. We're not really thinking about the customer, our processes, our systems, and increasingly now our robots. Because the goals that we want to be aiming at are the customer's goals. We want to be efficient from the customer's perspective. We want to monitor that we're delivering on the customer's perspective, making sure that any improvements that we make are focused around those priorities. But also when we come to improving processes, we have to look at it from two different lenses. There's one where we look at it from a transforming and completely doing something differently. And the second one is that even when we put it in place now, whether that's a process inside or outside our systems, we still need to find ways of improving it. And often it's been hard to improve a process after we've embedded it in a system or passed on the task to a robot, taken people out of the equation, and the knowledge is gone. And yet still we have the same challenge, because sometimes if we're just doing the same things faster, cheaper, better, we're not likely to survive. And, it's not related specifically to this point, but think about how with the various lockdowns, how many retailers are having to move to doing more of their business online in the hope of not being swept up by certain giants. But I ask yourself the question, From a customer point of view, do you want the same thing from an online store as you do from a physical store? Well, the fact is you probably want something somewhere in between. No matter how much effort you put into fixing your processes in a bricks and mortar retail store, that's not going to help you become a great e-tailer. So the processes and systems, and indeed the customer outcomes, are going to be different. So if you want to manage performance, then you need to think about those things differently. And the same thing goes when we think about people, particularly at the moment. You know, with so many people working from home that have never worked from home before, and you know, we've always got that the most famous quote, excuse me, you know, you're on mute. I think it's probably the de facto vocabulary now. We've got kids running around, we've got dogs, cats, all sorts of distractions, and it's causing amusement. But when we look at performance management, are you still managing your employees by the number of hours they sit at their desk? Or are you thinking about switching to measuring by outcomes? So if an employee chooses to work a completely different set of hours to fit in with childcare and all the other challenges, you relax. It's not about managing whether they're sitting at their desk for most employees. It's about asking, are they getting the work that you need to get done? Is it outcome based? Do you have that flexibility? Do your employees feel that they have that flexibility, or do they feel trapped? So I think you need to have a little bit of a think about the way that you monitor and manage performance, and ask whether you're still trying to apply the same things as when people were sitting in their desks, in their offices from 8 till 5, 9 till 6, whatever it is, and ask whether that's the appropriate way, both for getting the best for your organisation, but also in terms of, as we're going to talk about later, motivating people to give of their best. So have a think about it. What have you done in your new normal, rethinking, reshaping your business to reshape performance management from all aspects, and in particular with regard to customers and processes? So the next point that I wanted to talk a little bit about was reskilling for a hybrid digital workforce. I think few of us would argue that increasingly with robotic process automation, more systemization, be it even physical robots in production, we're really moving to a point where we're going to wind up with a hybrid workforce. And by thinking of it as a hybrid, I guess taking a lesson from cars, then we assume that there's a coexistence. We're building for coexistence. We're not separating the robots from the people and then causing challenges. We're getting them working together. So the goal is harmony. Now, one of the things that I've talked about in other presentations at other times is HR for robots. Because I know it sounds kind of strange and maybe counterintuitive, but a lot of people are talking about how to take on robots, to put robots into place, so hiring robots. But robots are just a technology, just like our iPhones or Android phones or other technologies. They're going to go out of date. So the fact is that we're going to need to hire, fire and retire robots just as we do our human workforces. We also need to train the robots. And by the way, robots need a far more detailed job description than many people. When we talk about automation, I wonder how much we're thinking about automation assistants, working with our people and asking them how we can provide technology to help them achieve their goals. Not us deciding that, you know, we've run some monitoring and we've decided that a robot can do this better and we're going to impose this on you. Excuse me. And I would also say that, just as a side issue, that I think RPA is insulting robots. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about the robot lawnmowers or robot vacuum cleaners, you know, they roll around your lawn or they roll around the room and they work out where the edges are, and then they don't bump into things. They learn. There's an element of learning to them. And sometimes we forget that although we talk about it as robotic process automation, they're not really learning. The robots that we use today, are employing today, don't learn and change. Yes, there's a lot of AI and machine learning coming along, but rarely do we see that coming in RPA. RPA is still about putting in some sort of task automation that's going to sit there and repeat repetitive tasks. You know, it will make the same mistake over and over and over again, regardless of what you think. So with a hybrid workforce, what we should be looking at doing is saying this is an amazing opportunity to increase productivity. It enables to achieve new heights, delivering better customer service, greater employee satisfaction, greater ability for our people to really serve the other stakeholders, the customers, their colleagues, etc., and to achieve new heights by building in the concept of the hybrid nature such that we can then apply newer technology in newer ways, and the people want to do it for themselves. And we've seen this a lot with some of the new moves from Microsoft. But I think that one of the things is that we're not really focused on how these kinds of technologies and how this hybrid workforce is going to be able to deliver new experiences for customers for problems that we hadn't even realised could be solved. That's when we're really achieving. That's what a hybrid workforce can do. And of course, a quote that's often put out, one of Richard Branson's here, clients don't come first, employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the clients. Well, of course, we can all argue that actually customers should come first, but I think the sentiment of what he's saying here is really important. Even when we're looking at the technologies and how to deploy, we do need to think about taking care of our employees. They aren't the robots. We're going to have robots, but our employees are not. So let's not treat them in that way. Okay, so focusing on real and unimagined journeys. What on earth do I mean by this? So just grabbed an example of a customer journey map. This one happens to be a mock-up of one for the US government. It doesn't really matter what it is. But what I'm looking at is that a lot of people now are looking to automate the customer journey mapping or modelling, and there are lots of definitive ways of creating this type of diagram. But the challenge is they do a couple of things. One, people think that when they're tracking you from clicking here to clicking there, that they're collecting a customer journey. What they're actually doing is collecting the customer's journey through your systems. Very useful, but let's not confuse it with the customer journey. And now, it's not just a case of saying this was the traditional customer journey. When we take that retail scenario that we've just talked about, do I go to the store? Do I use click and collect? Do I just order online? Is there a way of trying things online? There are some unimaginable journeys that we can create for our customers, which are really going to amaze them. And if we use that as a starting point, there's a lot we can do to reshape, rechange, and completely rethink the way that we do business such that we can keep doing business. But the key in doing this is to make sure that we're building for change, not assuming that this new way of working is going to last forever. So don't just think about the journeys your customers take today. Think about the journeys they might take tomorrow, next week, next year, however long you want to go into the future, and ask whether you're building in the adaptability. The other thing I just wanted to mention on journey maps is that a lot of people are reusing the phrase customer journey map, and that's great because I love them. I really do. I think they're an amazingly powerful technique to identify not just touch points to excite, but also poor business rules that get in the way of doing business, and a whole bunch of other things. But journey mapping is a technique that we can use in a number of different ways. We can, as I say, do customers. We can do employee journey mapping, the hire to retire. What's the journey? What's the journey of being onboarded? We can do patient journeys. We can do citizens journeys, and we can do user journeys through a system. Now that user could be a customer or an employee. And there are great examples of how this way of thinking can really change things. And for example, I was talking with an exec at a GE company a few years ago, and they were explaining that they were really struggling to put in a new SAP system. And they'd mapped out all the requirements and they'd worked everything through, but it was meeting resistance every time they tried to roll it out. But when they changed and sat down and actually said, well, actually, let's map the user's journey, they suddenly realized that once they looked at the system through the eyes of a user and how a user enacted and carried out their work, it was very easy to see why the system they were building wasn't meeting the needs. So creating user journey maps, a lot of people do it in Agile, but they call it a customer journey, I suggest that it's much, much smarter to actually call it the user journey. It makes it a lot easier for everyone to understand. If we all use the same vocabulary, meaning something different, then all we do is add confusion. So, side lesson, let's remove the confusion and use a more precise language wherever we can. Then I want to talk a little bit about data collection and management in the remote world, because some of the things that we've been doing are going to be different. Now, to do that, if we look at the top left-hand corner, I purposely picked a workshop with post-it notes and a whole bunch of people going around. And I've picked that because I get really frustrated, even though I'm now involved in marketing process mining, when process mining advocates, vendors, proponents, whatever language you want to use, tell me how process mining replaces the workshop. It doesn't. Process mining does something differently. Just imagine if ever you've been in one of those workshops, it doesn't actually matter to a certain extent what the post-its are saying on the wall. The fact that groups of people who may not have known each other or understood what other people do are coming together to create a common representation can never be underestimated. I think sometimes when we come at it from that engineering, analytical or scientific perspective, we think it's just about the post-it notes and say, well, that looks chaos. We don't think about the human aspects, the psychological aspects, the emotional aspects, the human interconnection. So it's my sincere hope that workshops and post-it notes will never go away. I also happen to think that in many cases, what's being mapped is at a far higher level. Remember, process mining can only mine information that's already in the system. Many process mining vendors talk about digital transformation. Well, I've got news for you. You've already digitalized, because if you haven't already digitalized, then process mining is not going to help you. Now, it can help and it can supplement and complement. And in particular, I just wanted to look, if we take a little look at the top right-hand side now, it's not very easy to see, but trust me, what we're seeing there are lots of timelines. So whether that's mortgage applications or whether that's claims processing, this is the journey that claims or mortgage applications are taking through a system or systems. But it can also not just be the journey of a system. This can be, and is, in the case of the way that it works with Navi, also the journey model. So you can take that journey that a customer goes or a prospect goes through all the way from HubSpot, through Salesforce, through SAP or whatever other system, and you can capture it along the way. And these are really useful, if you like, micro level customer journeys. Now, unless you're running a pure electronic business where everything comes in from a click and everything's delivered electronically, paid for electronically with no other interaction, then you may catch most of the customer journey, but you still won't catch it all, because the chances are the customer will be doing some things outside of your systems. But nonetheless, you can get a really good picture and identify very easily where a lot of the frustration for customers comes in. You can identify dropouts, you can identify good behaviors, bad behaviors. There's a whole bunch of really useful things. And then if we look directly below on the right hand side, then the process mining can also help us from an improvement point of view in collecting that information from the system. So when we're talking about now with our remote workforce, well, they're still inputting, for the most part, information into systems, so we can still check on compliance, conformance, and a whole bunch of those other things. Now, where we can't have the workshops, but we still want to understand what people are doing from a systems point of view, then on the bottom left, then there's some new stuff that's out there on the market now, task mining, and indeed it's one of the things that Javi's just released, which gives us the ability to run desktop recorders on a user's desktop, so to have the user decide that yes, they want it, or to negotiate with the groups. Well, we can actually now capture that, so if we're working remotely and we can't have a workshop, or we're in a situation where it's system requirements or system interactions that we're looking to understand, then we can actually now start to understand without actually having to have people physically together. It doesn't solve the same problem, but it supplements and complements so that we can capture information, so we can still move forward on all those necessary changes, improvements and transformations, and the technology can help. But as I say, it doesn't replace it complements. One of the other areas that I think we really do have to rethink and change is management and motivation, because a lot of organisations, or a lot of people that I talk to within other organisations, and I wrote a lot about some of these areas of motivation and management some months ago when we were going into the first lockdown, have not really changed. You know, we're still working in a place where we're using a lot of indirect motivation. So playing on the emotional side of things. Hey, it's economic. If you don't get your job done, then you could be at risk. We're making changes. And there's an inertia. You've got to make stuff happen. You've got to make stuff happen. And this creates a real emotional stress level. And I would suggest that when you look at a lot of the surveys about the emotional challenges that people are having, a lot of it is because actually they're being pushed on indirect motives, so a bit of the stick and less of the carrot. But we get a lot more done, and we want to do more for our organisations if we feel that work isn't work, it's play. We really are able to explore and grow as individuals, that we feel there's a purpose to what we're doing, and that not only to the work, but it helps you as an individual fulfil your purpose of achieving something and making something and being someone. And if that work is arranged in such a way that you feel that you can grow and achieve your full potential. And as I was researching this, I came by a quote or a line from Zappos. I mean, Zappos is talked about a lot, as we know, prior to acquisition in terms of some of the things that they do. But so much are Zappos focused on saying, hey, we want the right people who are motivated, if you like, by those direct motives, and not just I come to work to earn money, to get paid and move on. They want someone with more than that, that they put them through the week of training. Then, assuming that everything goes well, they offer them a job. But if they feel that Zappos isn't right for them, because you don't fit culturally, they'd rather the company pays them $2,000 and lets them go with no hard feelings. I wonder how many of our organisations think, you know, we can actually reward people for saying, you know, this isn't really for me, as opposed to someone thinking, I've got to cling on, got to cling on. So there's a different way, and I would ask you to think about, as I say, I'm not casting anything, but does your culture motivate or demotivate your staff? So switching from management to leadership is crucial in overcoming change challenges. Influencing, motivating, inspiring, creating, mentoring. How much of your time are you doing this? Or are you still focused on planning, organising, coordinating, controlling? And a great quote, I think, from Mary Barra. If we win the hearts and minds of employees, we're going to have better business success. And ultimately, that's what you want to achieve, better business success. So just have a look and think, even if you can't switch entirely from the left to the right, ask yourself, can I do more and am I doing enough? So that's just a fast run through some ideas. I hope sincerely that you can look at it as things to think about and question, what could you do better? Now, as a final thought, I wanted to share with you a couple of quotes, or two common quotes, from a book I wrote with Ian Gotts back in 2010. We're at a turning point where the technology we create needs to focus more on enabling us to do things that we hadn't even thought of, rather than simply automating what we already do. It's the former that will lead our business forward with renewed prosperity, and the latter will see us continuing to spiral down to the point of non-existence. We, like you, are people too. We share similar hopes, fears and emotions. All any of us want at a very personal level is to be able to feed and care for our families and friends, to live happy, healthy lives. So, as you go on in your own transformation journey, we ask that you think about the impact of the changes you're making on the lives of others, and how through your life and your own work, you can focus on enriching your life and the lives of those around you. Hard to believe that we wrote that over 10 years ago, but it would become even more prophetic today than it was at that time. We talk a lot about transformation, changes, new normal, digital, robots, etc. But at the end of the day, it comes down to people and the way that we treat others. And hopefully we do treat them as we'd like to be treated ourselves. Thank you very much. Have a great day.